so this is actually a fantastic segue. Thank you so much, because I think our presentations follow up very nicely, and I hope then Sarah will follow up very nicely with mine as well. I've been asked to focus a lot on access to finance in this presentation, but I also want to give you a larger background of the survey that we did in order to understand some of the access to finance issues as they relate to women in the off-grid lighting market in Africa. And I'm going to be talking about the World Bank IFC Lighting Africa project. Quickly, at IFC we look at women as an opportunity for the private sector, so we really look at women in all their roles in society as leaders, entrepreneurs, employees, consumers and stakeholders. Most of our focus in our Women in Business program, which is quite a young program, so we started in 2005, has actually focused on women as entrepreneurs, where we focus much on promoting women's access to finance at the small and medium enterprise level, and also on business training for women. On the leadership bit, we have definitely worked a lot on the investment climate to ensure that women entrepreneurs can start businesses as easily as men. And with regards to the investments that we do in the private sector, maybe I should have probably said that to begin with. The IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, so we invest in private sector companies in developing countries. Our largest portfolio is that of financial markets, where we invest in financial institutions, but we also invest in real sectors institutions as well. I'm going to go fast. These are some of our tools that we have to promote women in business. It includes everything, as I said before, on access to finance and improving the investment climate, but we also work on setting standards. So when we, for example, invest in real sector companies, most of you might be familiar with the performance standards that IFC has developed, and so this is for our agreement with our investment clients on what they have to do in order for us to allow us to invest into them. Here's the part that's going to start getting interesting for you guys for this purpose of this presentation. So we are, the nice thing about IFC is that we can actually do both. We can invest into institutions, we can actually bring the money, but we also provide the advisory services and then create new business opportunities. And what has happened in the past, and this is following up exactly on your presentation, is that we realized that the financial institutions were not financing women as much as we thought that they should. And they of course looked at us and were like, well, we don't discriminate against women, they just don't come, and if they're not credit worthy, and so that's why we're not able to. And then what we basically discovered is that and we did this also by doing mystery shopping, is that actually there was two issues that the banks had. Their bank staff was not trained to actually understand the women's segment of the market, and this is all at the SME level, so we're not talking microfinance, but we're really talking about financing sophisticated entrepreneurs. And so that it would actually take them longer to bank the women, because they would ask more questions, they would require more papers, and this was outside the regulatory environment. So this was actually something that was just in the hats of the bankers. And also their processes tended to be much more complicated. And then on the other side also, the women were not understanding how to present themselves in a bankable way. So they didn't bring the right papers, they had to go back, they didn't think that the men in the black suits could actually help them. And so that therefore it required working on both sides, and that's exactly what our advisory services brought to the forefront. So when we invested in initially pilot projects, we invested in the bank, we said, okay, this is the amount that we wanted to actually make available to women entrepreneurs, but we're also going to help you discover within the institution by training your bank staff on what they need to look at when it comes to the women's market. And we will also help you to design specific training programs so that you can actually then train your current women entrepreneurs in your portfolio and also your potential entrepreneurs, because we're looking at this from a business opportunity. If you have entrepreneurs in the SME market that are 30%, let's just say, in your particular market, but you're only banking 5, that's a missed business opportunity for the bank. And the same thing, if you're not helping that business grow of a women entrepreneur, then also that's a missed opportunity, because as the business grows, then there's more in it for the bank in terms of larger loan requirements going forward. And so we really, really look at it from a win-win situation. And and we found that actually this whole business is very profitable both for the bank, and a lot of banks internationally are now coming up and realizing when they're doing the analysis that actually the women's entrepreneurship portfolio is much more profitable than the men's portfolio, which is part of it quite interesting, and that actually this is a market not to be missed out on. We are a sponsor of what's called the Global Banking Alliance for Women, and I left you the website here so you can look it up afterwards. It now includes more than 30 banks. And it includes both developing country banks as well as developed country banks. Initially, it was only 4 members in the alliance, and they were from developed countries. We then decided as IFC, well, why don't we bring the experience from developed countries to developing countries? And in a very stereotypical way, we thought that the developed countries were going to developed country banks were going to teach the developing country banks on what to do, but it actually turned out the other way around. The developing country banks actually taught the developed country banks on what to do, because they had different issues, because the developed country banks, oh my God, I'm going to get like a problem. The developed country banks, they were actually much more into the marketing, whereas the developing country banks, they looked at product differentiation, because they had different issues that they were facing. And so it was a learn-win-win situation. I'm going to get into the energy bit now, which is probably what interests you most. And here we were very, very, very lucky. This is my colleagues in the Lighting Africa team that sit right across the hall from me. It turned out that they actually had done market research on lighting, off-grid lighting products in 2008. And we were sitting over lunch, I'm like, what are the gender issues in Lighting Africa? We were just discussing it. And it turned out that they had the 2008 data set, which included 5,000 surveys of households, and another 2,500 surveys of businesses. And thank God, some person decided on question number 27 to actually mention the sex of the survey respondent. So what I'm telling you now is basically looking back at the data from 2008 and looking at the gender differentiation, and fully realizing that this survey wasn't designed to actually have it gender informed. We're just looking at it backwards, but we have learned a lot of lessons on how you can do future surveys, particularly as we're going into the Lighting Asia market. And again, I should say that in these 5 countries, again, the idea is for us to develop the private sector to actually reach out to entrepreneurs and households with lighting, off-grid lighting products, that lighting is available for everyone. This is not from the survey, this is from the World Bank Group Enterprise Survey data base, but I wanted to put it in here in any case, because what we realized by looking at our own data sets, and this is different years for the countries that are part of the Lighting Africa project, is actually that women are facing more difficulties to get on the grid, be it in terms of the brides, be it in terms of the time that it takes for them to get on the grid. And this is women entrepreneurs, this is not households, this is enterprises with female ownership. And so what that then also taught us, that if women take longer to get on the grid, then that also means that they're relatively more able to benefit from off-grid lighting products. And this is also not just a developing country issue. In fact, when we were doing some research, we realized that in the 1930s in the United States, so this is United States 1930s, rural electrification was just taking off, and the private sector company there, which was the National Electric Lighting Association, they realized in order to ensure that households were getting on the grid, they had to actually employ female staff to better reach out to the female staff in the households, and they realized that this gender dimension is quite important. So, and they were then successful to move ahead with rural electrification. These are some of the lighting products that the Lighting Africa project promotes. And one of the survey questions was on preferences. Do people have, do women and men, do the households, do they have, what kind of preferences do they have for lighting devices? And this is probably a little bit too small for you to see, but interestingly enough, women and men had similar preferences. So it wasn't like men needed different lighting products than women. On the entrepreneurship side also, the preferences turned out to be similar. We thought maybe there's a knowledge issue, that maybe women entrepreneurs don't know about the existence of these products, but it turned out that women and men both knew about them, more or less, and that they were actually quite eager to be able to get access to these products. We found out, of course, that we knew that women had different shops, different types of businesses than men, but at the same time, what really mattered was the type of the shop that might be responsible for having a different preference for lighting rather than the gender of the person. Then we were looking at, like, okay, who decides on what's being bought in the household? And it turned out that, again, women almost make 40% of the decisions in the household when it comes to what kind of lighting product is being put into the house. And that also then meant for our producers and our distributors, you have to actually also reach out to women in your marketing strategies, because if you want to bring these lighting products to the African continent, you have to include women in your outreach. We didn't have any, we were trying to figure out whether women are more concerned about health when it comes to, like, indoor pollution, etc., etc. Unfortunately, we didn't have this data set by gender, but what we did know is that the more people were concerned about health, the more they were also interested in having the more advanced lighting technology that would have less pollution. And now we're coming back to the financing bit. We knew that more women were relying on informal networks and lending groups for financing than men. And we tried to figure out, well, how long does it take to buy these products, right, in order to pay for them, because they're more expensive than the conventional kerosene lamps, for example. And so, on average, 80% of the people surveyed, it would take them about 2 weeks of an income to actually be able to pay for some of the lighting products that the Lighting Africa project mentions. But again, the other thing is that actually both men and women didn't have these kind of financial resources. And so what we then did is we looked at, well, does it matter whether you have a bank account? If you have a bank account, would that actually influence your ability to pay is that an indicator for you to be able to pay for it? And it actually was not the case, because there was so few men that also didn't have any bank accounts to begin with. And then this is just, and I left the slide in so you can have it in the PowerPoint when you get the sticks, but just to see how we interviewed people and what kind of access to financial services they had. And this is for Ethiopia, Ghana, and Zambia. This is actually something from the World Development Report that was produced by the Africa team, and it really is very, very interesting in that it actually shows you where women and men have access to different financial services and products by sex. So it's banking, people that have informal access to financial services, and those that are excluded. And here's where you see those huge gender differences, that actually women have much more difficulties in having access to finance. And let me go one slide back. And so when we looked at what are the possibilities, and for us at IFC to take this forward, we have, I told you earlier how our mechanism is in terms of investing in banks and providing the advisory services, training the bankers and also the women entrepreneurs. We have now made this a global target, so 25% of all of our investments that are going to finance SMEs have to go to women, which is quite a challenge for our investment officers, but it's actually because we think it's profitable, we know it's profitable. This is an area where we're really making a huge emphasis. Also more concretely, an experience from Tanzania where we worked with Exim Bank. What we also did is link the microfinance institutions with the small and medium enterprise institutions. And here, the whole idea was that if you have if you have microfinance entrepreneurs that are trying to grow but they don't have access to larger loans, then there could be a referral system from the microfinance institution to the commercial bank. Or if a microfinance entrepreneur approaches the commercial bank thinking that they might be able to get funding, and the bank cannot make it because they don't meet the requirements, then they can refer them back to the microfinance institution. We have also come around very innovative ways of collateral and to get around the collateral requirements. In Nigeria, one of our client banks has introduced jewelry as collateral. In other places, there's global experiences that are very innovative. I'm looking at Francesco, thinking about Asia. I should mention that we have also penetrated the Asian market with our Women's Access to Finance program. We have deals in Indonesia and in China, working on India, and so this is really taking off more globally. What is an interesting experience for us is also to work much more with informal networks or women's associations. We figured out much that specifically when it comes to lighting, right, that also there's cross-selling that I think is very important, because the cook stove story is very similar to the off-grid lighting story. Like, how do you get it into rural areas and how do you make it financially available? And so one of our next steps is to actually work with these kind of initiatives and actually try to sell both products, so that we are not all doing the same thing, going after the same customers, but actually trying to do it jointly with other organizations. There was a very interesting approach also by Solar Sisters, which I believe is in Uganda and in Rwanda, where they're using a consignment approach. So for those of you that are familiar with the Avon model, that then means that the actual end consumer doesn't have to take a loan, that they can actually, that actually Solar Sisters is the people that are giving the actual products to the end user. So there's no need to actually have a loan engagement, which is also very innovative. And then finally, the other cross-selling issue that I wanted to mention is on mobile banking. Again, a study by the Sherry Blair Foundation and GSMA, they found that women in Africa have 23% less access to mobile phones than men. And so again, mobile phones are very important also for women entrepreneurs, but also for women in general, be it on safety, be it on able to check on the market, etc. But if you have a mobile phone and you don't have electricity, then that makes it very difficult to charge your phone all the time. So here the idea is again that if we could come up with some charging devices, and that is already being developed by the market, cross-sell it so that actually the mobile phone can be charged on a device that also charges the off-grid lighting product, then it's a win-win situation, and then both of these reinforce each other. And we also actually have a lot of investments in the telecom sector, so we're also looking to expand on those linkages going forward. I think I'm done with my time, but what I wanted to show you is the report, which I have some hard copies of. I didn't bring enough, so you can read a little bit more about the report here. Wanted to mention my collaborators in this, Peter Oster and Brennan Mendonça were the ones at the Humboldt University that actually are the energy specialists. We learned a lot from each other in the process, and then Ariana Eftimier from Vanessa's team, who was presenting on the last panel, also helped us produce this report. For you may be interesting, not directly related to access to finance, as we actually came up with some ideas on how to improve the M&E framework going forward, specifically with a view to engender future surveys. And then I wanted to also show you, this is related to access to finance, and this is the G20 report findings on women's need for financing and the finance gap, which was launched at the G20 in Cannes last month. It's a very, very hot report still, which actually for the first time gets around the data issues on ability of SMEs to get access to finance, women-owned SMEs. And of course, I think it's so obviously, but maybe for you guys to just remember, it is quite difficult to get this data, because most SMEs, when they register and when they also apply for loans, the sex of the owner is not necessarily captured. So like if you have an SME that's called Happy Friday, I don't know, then the SME is Happy Friday. So when you're asking the bank, you know, how are you doing in terms of financing women-owned SMEs, they don't know whether Happy Friday is owned by a woman or whether it's owned by a man. And so that takes a lot of data issues. So this is really the first effort that we did with the G20, a lot of support from the US Treasury to get this done, to actually put some numbers behind some of the thinking. So I'm leaving this for you as well. And my final favorite picture, because we talked about women in the petroleum sector, this is actually a CEO of one of our Kuwait energy companies that we have invested in. And you're thinking like, why is IFC investing in Kuwait? Actually, they then also invested in, it's a company that's in Kuwait, but they've invested in Yemen and Ukraine. And it's just one of those women leaders that is actually in a very male-dominated area. So I'll leave you with that.